Until noon, this is Neil Mitchell.
Good morning. Zero tolerance. Now, at last in the terrorism fight, the promise is for zero tolerance. We've got 7 people dead, 21 critical, 40 in hospital, 3 terrorists dead, 12 arrests, 3 attacks on Britain in less than 3 months. Today, at last, the talk is about zero tolerance. Zero tolerance of Islamic extremism, zero tolerance of hate preachers, zero tolerance of returned fighters. There's today talk of reducing the level of proof in this country so suspected terrorists and terrorist sympathisers can be more easily locked up. There's talk of closing the borders to Muslim migration. There's talk of having specialised army units on permanent standby in this country. There's not an air of panic in Australia, there's a mood of anger and frustration and fear that politically correct pandering is part of the problem. Now, I don't know that it is. Donald Trump is saying it is. I don't know. There's strong disagreement here. This is a form of war. But if you start to use wartime methods from old-fashioned wars, you may achieve nothing and aggravate a lot. We'll debate that today with people who have strong views on both sides. Some argue inclusion is the only way. Others argue the hard line. I certainly believe we've got to look at the options, including forms of internment for suspects. We'll discuss that. But first, let me play for you a few minutes of what I think is an extremely important speech. Now, Donald Trump has tweeted that political correctness is to blame for what's happened in the UK, for what's happening around the world. But this is the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, saying the fight must change, saying the fight is on. Depending what happens now, depending whether she delivers, well, this could be considered just a piece of politics, or it could be considered one of the most important speeches in recent history. Theresa May.
In terms of their planning and execution, the recent attacks are not connected. But we believe we are experiencing a new trend in the threat we face, as terrorism breeds terrorism, and perpetrators are inspired to attack, not only on the basis of carefully constructed plots after years of planning and training, and not even as lone attackers radicalised online, but by copying one another and often using the crudest of means of attack. We cannot and must not pretend that things can continue as they are. Things need to change, and they need to change in 4 important ways. First, while the recent attacks are not connected by common networks, they are connected in one important sense. They are bound together by the single evil ideology of Islamist extremism that preaches hatred, sows division, and promotes sectarianism. It is an ideology that claims our Western values of freedom, democracy, and human rights are incompatible with the religion of Islam. It is an ideology that is a perversion of Islam and a perversion of the truth. Defeating this ideology is one of the great challenges of our time, but it cannot be defeated through military intervention alone. It will not be defeated through the maintenance of a permanent defensive counter-terrorism operation, however skillful its leaders and practitioners. It will only be defeated when we turn people's minds away from this violence and make them understand that our values, pluralistic British values, are superior to anything offered by the preachers and supporters of hate. Second, we cannot allow this ideology the safe space it needs to breed. Yet that is precisely what the internet and the big companies that provide internet-based services provide. We need to work with allied democratic governments to reach international agreements that regulate cyberspace to prevent the spread of extremist and terrorism planning. And we need to do everything we can at home to reduce the risks of extremism online. Third, while we need to deprive the extremists of their safe spaces online, we must not forget about the safe spaces that continue to exist in the real world. Yes, that means taking military action to destroy ISIS in Iraq and Syria, but it also means taking action here at home. While we have made significant progress in recent years, there is, to be frank, far too much tolerance of extremism in our country. So we need to become far more robust in identifying it and stamping it out across the public sector and across society. That will require some difficult and often embarrassing conversations. But the whole of our country needs to come together to take on this extremism. And we need to live our lives not in a series of separated, segregated communities, but as one truly united kingdom. Fourth, we have a robust counter-terrorism strategy that has proved successful over many years. But as the nature of the threat we face becomes more complex, more fragmented, more hidden, especially online, the strategy needs to keep up. So in light of what we are learning about the changing threat, we need to review Britain's counter-terrorism strategy to make sure the police and security services have all the powers they need. And if we need to increase the length of custodial sentences for terrorism-related offences, even apparently less serious offences, that is what we will do.
Okay, zero tolerance she's talking about. First time I've heard that. 96900 693 13 13 32. What do you think? Other issues here. She says there have been 5 credible attacks foiled since March. It took British police 8 minutes to react and in fact kill the terrorists. Compare that to the response on the aircraft in Melbourne last week. There's talk about locking up suspects and putting them before a special panel and locking them up. We'll talk about that after 9. There are people walking around Australia police know were fighting in Iraq or Syria with ISIS but can't meet the level of proof. Do we change that level of proof? Make it easier to lock people up for terrorism offences. We're told there are 300 people on a watch list in Victoria. What do we do with them? Indonesia bans some extremist Muslim organisations. We don't. Indonesia's a Muslim country. We are told we should review migration from Muslim countries and refugee programs. Is that worth looking at? It's an uncertain and nervous time. The question is if any of us will forego the rights we need to forego to fight it. Whether that radicalises more Muslim extremists or defeats the few that exist. And remember, we're talking about a tiny percentage here of the Muslim population. Most are decent and law-abiding. Don't forget that. 96900 693 13 13 32.